Why should I not publish my diary? I have often seen reminiscences of people I have never even heard of, and I fail to see, because I do not happen to be a somebody, why my diary should not be interesting. My only regret is that I did not commence it when I was a youth. Charles Pooter. My dear wife, Carrie, and I have just been a week in our new house, the Laurels, Brickfield Terrace, Holloway. A nice 6-roomed residence, not counting basement, with a front breakfast parlour. We have a little front garden, and there is a flight of 10 steps up to the front door, which, by the way, we keep locked with the chain up. We have a nice little back garden which runs down to the railway. We were rather afraid of the noise of the trains at first, but the landlord said we should not notice them after a bit, and took £2 off the rent. He was certainly right. And beyond the cracking of the garden wall at the bottom, we have suffered no inconvenience. After my work in the city, I like to be at home. What's the good of a home if you're never in it? Home, sweet home, that's my motto. I'm always in of an evening. Our old friend Going may drop in without ceremony, so may Cummings, who lives opposite. My dear wife Caroline and I are pleased to see them if they like to drop in on us, but Carrie and I can manage to pass our evenings together without friends. There's always something to be done. A tin tack here, a Venetian blind to put straight, a fan to nail up, or part of a carpet to nail down, all of which I can do with my pipe in my mouth, while Carrie is not above putting a button on a shirt, mending a pillowcase, or practising the Sylvia Gavotte on our new cottage piano. It is also a great comfort to us to know that our boy, Willie, is getting on so well in the bank at Oldham. We should like to see more of him. Now for my diary. April the 3rd. Tradesman called for custom, and I promised Farmerson, the ironmonger, to give him a turn if I wanted any nails or tools. By the by, that reminds me, the bells must be seen to. The parlour bell is broken, and the front door rings up in the servant's bedroom, which is ridiculous. Dear friend Going dropped in, but wouldn't stay, saying there was an infernal smell of paint. April the 4th. Tradesman still calling. Carrie being out, I arranged to deal with Horwin, who seemed a civil butcher with a nice clean shop. Ordered a shoulder of mutton for tomorrow to give him a trial. Carrie arranged with Borsett, the butterman, and ordered a pound of fresh butter and a shilling's worth of eggs. In the evening, Cummings unexpectedly dropped in to show me a meerschaum pipe he'd won in a raffle in the city. He told me to handle it carefully, as it would spoil the colouring if the hand was moist. He said he wouldn't stay, as he didn't care much for the smell of paint, and fell over the scraper as he went out. Must get the scraper removed, or else I shall get into a scrape. I don't often make jokes. April the 5th. 2 shoulders of mutton arrived, Carrie having arranged with another butcher without consulting me. Going called and fell over a scraper coming in. Must get that scraper removed. April the 6th. Eggs for breakfast, simply shocking. Sent them back to Borsett with my compliments, and he needn't call any more for orders. Couldn't find umbrella, and though it was pouring with rain, had to go without it. Sarah said Mr. Going must have took it by mistake last night, as there was a stick in the awl that didn't belong to nobody. In the evening, hearing someone talking in a loud voice to the servant in the downstairs hall, I went out to see who it was, and was surprised to find it was Borsett, the butterman, who was both drunk and offensive. Borsett, on seeing me, said he'd be hanged if he would ever serve city clerks any more. The game wasn't worth the candle. I restrained my feelings and quietly remarked that I thought it possible for a city clerk to be a gentleman. He replied he was very glad to hear it, and wanted to know whether I'd ever come across one, for he hadn't. He left the house, slamming the door after him, which nearly broke the fanlight, and I heard him fall over the scraper, which made me feel very glad I hadn't removed it. April the 9th. Commenced the morning badly. The butcher, whom we decided not to arrange with, called and blackguarded me in the most uncalled-for manner. He began by abusing me and saying that he did not want my custom. I simply said, "What are you making all this fuss about it for?" And he shouted at the top of his voice, so that all the neighbours could hear, "Pa, go along! Huh! I could buy up things like you by the dozen." I shut the door and was giving Carrie to understand that this disgraceful scene was entirely her fault. And there was a violent kicking at the door, enough to break the panels. It was the blackguard butcher again, who said that he'd cut his foot over the scraper and would immediately bring an action against me. called at Farmerson's, the ironmonger, on my way to town, and gave him the job of moving the scraper. April the 10th. Farmerson came round to attend to the scraper himself. He seems a very civil fellow. He says he does not usually conduct such small jobs personally, but for me he would do so. I thanked him and went to town. It is disgraceful how late some of the young clerks are at arriving. I told 3 of them that if Mr. Perkup, the principal, heard of it, they might be discharged. Pitt, a monkey of 17 who's only been with us 6 weeks, told me to keep my hair on. I informed him that I had had the honour of being in the firm 20 years, to which he instantly replied that I looked it. I gave him an indignant look and said, "I demand from you some respect, sir." And he replied, "All right, go on demanding." I would not argue with him any further. Cannot argue with people like that. In the evening, Going called and repeated his complaint about the smell of paint, Going's sometimes very tedious with his remarks and not always cautious. And Carrie once very properly reminded him that she was present. April 11th. Today was a day of annoyances. I missed the 8:45 bus to the city through having words with the grocer's boy, who for the 2nd time had had the impertinence to bring his basket to the hall door and had left the marks of his dirty boots on the fresh, clean doorsteps. I was half an hour late at the office, a thing that has never happened to me before. There has recently been much irregularity in the attendance of the clerks, and Mr. Perkup, our principal, unfortunately chose this very morning to pounce down upon us early. Someone had given the tip to the others. The result was that I was the only one late. As I passed by Pitt's desk, I heard him remark to his neighbours, "How disgracefully late some of the head clerks arrive." April the 12th. Left Farmerson repairing the scraper, but when I came home found 3 men working. I asked the meaning of it, and Farmerson said that in making a fresh hole he had penetrated the gas pipe. He said it was the most ridiculous place to put the gas pipe, and the man who did it evidently knew nothing about his business. I felt his excuse was no consolation for the expense that I should be put to. In the evening, after tea, Going dropped in. We had a smoke together in the breakfast parlour. Going began his usual sniffing, and so anticipating him, I said, "You're not going to complain of the smell of paint again?" He said, "No, not this time. But I tell you what, I distinctly smell dry rot." I don't often make jokes, but I replied, "You're talking a lot of dry rot yourself." I could not help roaring at this, and Carrie said her sides quite ached with laughter. I never was so immensely tickled by anything I had ever said before. I actually woke up twice during the night and laughed till the bed shook. April the 19th. Cummings called, bringing with him his friend Merton, who is in the wine trade. Going also called. Mr. Merton made himself at home at once, and Carrie and I were both struck with him immediately, and thoroughly approved of his sentiments. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You must take me as I am," and I replied, "Yes, and you must take us as we are. We're homely people. We're not swells." He answered, "No, I can see that," and Going roared with laughter. But Merton, in a most gentlemanly manner, said to Going, "I don't think you quite understand me. I intended to convey that our charming host and hostess were superior to the follies of fashion, and preferred leading a simple and wholesome life to gadding about to twopenny-halfpenny tea-drinking afternoons and living above their incomes." He further said that at any time I wanted any passes for the theatre, I was to let him know, as his name stood good for any theatre in London. April the 20th. Carrie reminded me that as her old school friend, Annie Fuller's, now Mrs. James, and her husband had come up from Sutton for a few days, it would look kind to take them to the theatre, and would I drop a line to Mr. Merton, asking him for passes for 4, either for the Italian Opera, Haymarket, Savoy, or Lyceum. I wrote Merton to that effect. April the 21st. Got a reply from Merton saying he was very busy, and just at present couldn't manage passes for the Italian Opera, Haymarket, Savoy, or Lyceum. But the best thing going on in London was the Brown Bushes at the Tank Theatre, Islington, and enclosed seats for 4. April the 23rd. Mr. and Mrs. James, Miss Fuller that was, came to meet tea, and we left directly after for the Tank Theatre. We got a bus that took us to King's Cross, and then changed into one that took us to the Angel. And Mr. James each time insisted on paying for all, saying that I had paid for the tickets, and that was quite enough. We arrived at the theatre. I walked ahead, presented the tickets. The man looked at them and called out, Mr. Wilner, do you know anything about these? Holding up my tickets. The gentleman called, came up and examined my tickets and said, who gave you these? I said rather indignantly, Mr. Merton, of course. He said, Merton? Who's he? I answered rather sharply, you ought to know. His name's good at any theatre in London. He replied, oh, is it? Well, it ain't no good here. These tickets, which are not dated, were issued under Mr. Swinstead's management, which has since changed hands. April the 24th. I wrote a very satirical letter to Merton, the wine merchant, who gave us the pass, and said, considering that we had to pay for our seats, we did our best to appreciate the performance. I thought this line rather cutting, and asked Carrie how many P's there were in appreciate, and she said 1. After I sent off the letter, I looked at the dictionary and found there were 2. Awfully vexed at this. April the 25th. In consequence of Brickwell telling me that his wife was working wonders with the new Pinkford's enamel paint, I determined to try it. I bought 2 tins of red on my way home. I hastened through tea, went into the garden and painted some flower pots. I called out Carrie, who said, you've always got some newfangled craze. But she was obliged to admit that the flower pots looked remarkably well. Went upstairs into the servant's bedroom and painted her washstand, towel horse and a chest of drawers. To my mind, it was an extraordinary improvement. But as an example of the ignorance of the lower classes in the matter of taste, our servant Sarah, on seeing them, evinced no sign of pleasure, but merely said she thought they looked very well as they was before. April 26th. Got some more red enamel paint, red to my mind being the best colour, and painted the coal scuttle and the backs of our Shakespeare, the binding of which had almost worn out. April 27th. Painted the bath red, and was delighted with the result. Sorry to say Carrie was not. In fact, we had a few words about it. She said I ought to have consulted her, and she'd never heard of such a thing as a bath being painted red. I replied, it's merely a matter of taste. April the 29th, Sunday. Woke up with a fearful headache and strong symptoms of a cold. Carrie, with a perversity which is just like her, said it was painter's colic, and was the result of my having spent the last few days with my nose over a paint pot. I told her firmly that I knew a great deal better what was the matter with me than she did. I'd got a chill, and decided to have a bath as hot as I could bear it. Bath ready, could scarcely bear it so hot. I persevered and got in. Very hot, but very acceptable. I lay still for some time. On moving my hand above the surface of the water, I experienced the greatest fright I've ever received in the whole course of my life. For imagine my horror on discovering my hand, as I thought, full of blood. My first thought was that I'd ruptured an artery and was bleeding to death. My second thought was to ring the bell, but remembered that there was no bell to ring. My third was that it was nothing but the enamel paint, which had dissolved with boiling water. I stepped out of the bath, perfectly red all over, resembling the Red Indians I had seen depicted at an East End theatre. I determined not to say a word to Carrie, but to tell Farmerson to come on Monday and paint the bath white.